On Monday, the 26th of April, the board of Twitter agreed a $44 billion takeover from Elon Musk. Mr. Musk, who made the shock bid less than 2 weeks ago, said Twitter has tremendous potentials that he would like to unlock. The move comes after Twitter faces growing pressure from politicians and, of course, regulators over the content that appears on its platform. Let's get talking. Mr. Idowu Akinde is already here in the house. Startup coach, thank you so much for your time. Happy holidays.
Thank you, too.
And thank you for your time, at least, moving out during this holiday season.
Always a pleasure.
First, what do you make of this move? You're in the system, I know. So take us through what you think will be different with this buy-off.
Okay, so first of all, thank you for having me. First of all, it's obviously an expression of somebody's personal wishes who has the means to carry out those wishes. So it's not entirely, he has the means, that's the first thing.
Yeah.
And so what's going to happen is you're wondering if this is going to be a playbook that will be repeated among the big companies, not just tech companies around the world. Are we going to have more public companies, big public companies, probably tech companies, being bought out and taken private? Yes, Mr. Musk, Elon Musk, has demonstrated a lot of goodwill, good faith toward addressing the key point of criticism that has surrounded Twitter for years, which is how do they censor content on their platform.
Yeah.
People have used Twitter for all sorts of purposes that are perhaps not for the social good. And so Elon wants to take it upon himself. First of all, he believes that, Elon can be quite direct sometimes. So he has expressed publicly that he has zero confidence in the management of Twitter and that he wants to then buy it out, take it private, and direct the affairs himself. Because if it's private, then he doesn't need board approval to take decisions. Some of those things have received positive reviews. For instance, the algorithm is the logic in the computer. The logic in the computer that ranks tweets and says certain tweets should be promoted and others should be suppressed. He wants to make that algorithm open source and public so that there will be a record in history forever for anybody to go to the internet, for instance, and see that so-so tweet was promoted by so-so employee of Twitter on so-so date and or was demoted by so-so employee of Twitter on so-so date. And it's going to be public record, the same way we have, open source movement and open source software and stuff.
Like I said, let me read this to you. One of the famous statements Elon Musk made prior to the takeover, and I quote, "If our Twitter bid succeeds, we will defeat spam bots or die trying." And now I'm looking at all of that has happened following that and all of these moves, even looking at the Dago coin as, how do you see this boosting performance, outlook, and of course, subscription base?
So two things. As we all know, the stock market is entirely held up, partly by company fundamentals, but mostly by the public's degree of confidence, right, in the particular company. So people like to, some people like to say that the stock market, is white collar scam, but just to clarify that, what they mean is it is held up by confidence. So if a person, a private individual that is associated with a certain publicly traded company takes certain actions that are perceived not good in the public eye, it will most likely always affect the shares of that company, and vice versa. If they do something good, it will drive the shares of that company forward. So going forward, so that's the first thing. There's always the place of public confidence going up and down based on people's perception of his actions. And Elon is a very smart man. He's done a very good PR campaign slightly before and certainly following all of these actions. There's been a couple of TED conferences, 2 to my knowledge. There was the private one in his Texas Gigafactory, and then there's a public one at the TED Conference Center. So he's obviously making sure that the public doesn't misinterpret what he's doing. He's sending out the right signals that he wants them to have about what he's doing. So number one, fighting spam. So like I said earlier, two things have been big on Twitter's bad list of attributes. Number one is that guarantee of quote unquote free speech. Okay, and when people tweet hurtful or hate speech, how do you handle it? So Twitter has had a lot of criticism on that. Number two is what you mentioned, spam bots. So you and I are two living, breathing individuals. I know you, you know me. People can validate our existence as humans. There are a lot of accounts on Twitter. I can't speak to their number, but probably in the millions. There are a lot of accounts on Twitter that are not manned by human beings. And that presents a problem because sometimes they just take actions and drive certain things, in the public eye, and it looks like there's a lot of human interest. Meanwhile, it's computer-generated interest. So he also wants to crack down on that. Spam bots.
Let's look at Twitter now to deserve public trust. Then it must be politically neutral.
Precisely the term to use, neutral. Spot on.
We've seen what has happened, the ban that happened lately and all of that. So what do you think, particularly as we move towards the political season?
So, it's also public knowledge that Elon is slightly more sympathetic to the right, which is the Republican side of things, or political system, political view. Even though it's also public knowledge that Mr. Trump, the great Mr. Trump, fired him from, one of those economic committees that he was appointed to serve on, but more than he leans right more than left, okay? So there's that slight consideration. I think that the next few weeks and months and whether he meets the promises that he has made to the public, justifying the buyout, will tell us whether this had some political undertone to it or not. There's also, it's important what you mentioned about political neutrality. So it's a tricky thing to talk in human terms about political neutrality, but to implement it in computing terms. How does a computer interpret at a level similar to how human intelligence would interpret a tweet and say, this tweet or this statement or this sentence is politically charged leftward or rightward? So our computing systems are not that, our AI algorithm systems are not that sophisticated yet. So there will always be some human moderation. And so he needs to really, really work on his people to always maintain that neutrality. They must always have either citable evidence to support them when they are taking those actions, because what they are doing is, going forward, it will be possible for people to dispute the action, or people to contest rather the action of, you promoted my tweet, you demoted, or you promoted somebody else's tweet and demoted mine.
On what basis?
On what basis? So, which is why he's asking that people should always have that, his staff that will make those decisions should have that evidence so that they can always attach it to the action of the tweet. So perhaps that will help them in lawsuits.
I'm staying more about that previous ban before we almost wrap up. A lot of issues were discussed then, taxes, presence and all of that, national security issues and all of that. But would you say that all of this clearly been upheld at this time? Would you say all demands have been met?
Well, I think...
Or to a level?
To a level, yes. To a level, yes. I mean, it's quite... the political atmosphere there is not completely detached from the business atmosphere or the business space, So there's no way that, for instance, I mean, what is lobbying defined as, right? Lobbying is people making their case in the corridors of power for their personal views or the interests of the people that they represent. So essentially, at the end of the day, people will lobby for economic policies and or business policies that are favorable to the people they represent. If those people represent leftward political philosophies, so be it. If they represent rightward, so be it. So at the end of the day, people will always represent what favors them. So Elon, particularly, perhaps if you permit me,
go ahead.
Elon is particularly popular for always having suggested a slightly different form of democracy. So Elon has always said that, and he always says it in context of the Mars mission, the Mars colony that he's trying to create, that he would propose that when the people that get to Mars get there, they should not institute representative democracy, they should institute direct democracy. For small populations, maybe a population of 20, 300, 500, maybe less than 20,000, maybe that makes sense. But when you have populations in the millions and maybe billions at the global level, I don't know how practical direct democracy is. But hey, these are his expressions. These are his.
So, like positions. It's on the screen, the future of Twitter as Elon Musk takes over. What do you think? What's your overview of the Twitter space and maybe the social media space moving on?
Okay, so I'll speak as someone I'll speak exclusively from the economic lens. I think that right now, Twitter's work is cut out for them. And by Twitter, I refer to the collective, the people who make up Twitter. Their work is cut out for them. Right now, they have a promise to fulfill. So they need to really deliver on those promises, all the way from the new owner, when it passes a regulatory approval, Mr. Musk, all the way down to the last employee. They need to deliver on that promise of, number one, transparency. Number two, the transparency through making the algorithms open source. Number two, the reforms, okay? Number three, the spam bots, and number four, authenticating real humans from robots and stuff like that. So if they can do that, I don't think that ultimately anybody will care which platform is delivering your news, as long as you are sure that it's not going to deliver flavored or colored news to you before you get a chance to interpret it yourself. I think that's what most people want, and that's what will work. Do
you have any more concerns about this development as we wrap up?
Perhaps on the funding side, but he's got a group of banks to.
And even affected the shares of Tesla immediately that happened.
It did. And I think that may be from people's general sentiment that he's taking on too much. So even though he defends this concern every time he has a public appearance, I follow Elon quite a bit. Even though he defends himself well by saying that he's actively on the board of only 2 or 3, Tesla, SpaceX, I think Neuralink, he always detaches himself from the rest and say, hey, I'm not on the board. I'm just a shareholder. But even then, it's clear that I think that the people who are such a nosedive in share performance would have been driven by people's discomfort with the fact that he's taking on so much. Yeah. He already has so much to handle, and they are mission-critical projects, taking people to Mars, solving sustainable energy, renewable, and stuff like that, So I think that's what's driving that. But by and large, he's someone who has a reputation for getting things done.
I think it's a good way to leave it.
Yeah.
I must thank you so much. It's always interesting talking to you. Startup coach there, Mr. Idowu Akinde. Thank you again for spending your holiday with us. We appreciate this.
Thank you, Tolu.